Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Neisser.
My guest today is Mayur Gupta, Global VP Growth and Marketing at Spotify. Mayur is an innovator to the core. We first met when he was driving use of data for marketing at Kimberly-Clark. He is in my book, in fact. But now he's at Spotify, and he's responsible for driving growth and innovation by testing new business models, partnerships, and engagement strategies. It really sounds like a very cool job. So welcome, Mayur.
Thanks, Drew. Thank you for having me over again.
It's my pleasure. And I have to say, it's funny, I was talking to my son last night, and just the fact that you and I are talking made me cooler, so I appreciate that. But I can't wait to talk a little bit about what you have going at Spotify, but we'll get to that. And before, I have this theory that there's just a little bit of renegade in every successful marketer. What's one way that you're a renegade?
That's an interesting one that I should have expected, but I guess the easiest way for me to sort of answer that is the fact that you're calling me as a marketer and I have a marketing job today is a renegade in itself. I grew up as a pure technologist, as an engineer. For many years, I did not understand anything but technology. But the world around us has evolved perhaps many times just in the last 10 years, let alone 18 to 20 years when I started. But, what was an analog world which I grew up in is now intrinsically digital. Our lives, of course, are dependent on technology today in a very complex and fragmented digital world. And what that means for brands to engage and inspire and retain that one individual, they have to be operating at a much, much higher bar, which is usually at the intersection of marketing, technology, and data. And I think I'm I'll call it a fortunate symptom of that evolution. Somebody who's not a traditional 4As or a 4Ps kind of person. But I think about marketing more from an engineering mindset that starts with a very simple understanding of an emotional and functional human need and thinking about it more as a system with many different pieces that are interconnected, which is not limited to a channel, not limited to any technology, not limited to a media plan per se, but an entire system which isn't fragmented anymore. And I strongly believe modern marketers need system thinking because of that reason that breaks down these silos. So that's what I try to do in my learning curve. And as machines come in, it gets more and more interesting, where marketing will become more efficient, more effective, and more accurate.
It's really interesting. It's funny because I think a lot of chief marketing officers in particular come from complete opposite place and sometimes look at the data and are either just completely overwhelmed by it or they embrace it, but still they don't have the tech background to sort of even know the right questions and what the possibilities are. So you certainly come at it from that standpoint as marketing becomes more of a technology. I'm curious if we boil it down to someone who's working at a smaller company for starters, and they don't have the budget of a Kimberly-Clark and even Spotify for that matter. How should they be thinking about the use of data as an opportunity to improve their marketing effectiveness?
See, there is, and again, this is regardless of the size and scale of the organization, because I strongly believe the challenges and the opportunities are so consistent in today's world, regardless of whether you are a Fortune 100 or perhaps $100 million company, right? Regardless of which vertical as well. But in terms of there's obviously a lot of buzzword around being a data-driven organization, and everyone's talking about it. But I feel there is no dearth of data today. There's a lot of data. There's a dearth of an understanding of where and when and how to apply it, right? Which means it's not about some very, very basic use case. To illustrate the point is, there's a lot of investment in segmenting our audiences. A lot of people do ethnographic segmentation and research work, psychographics and whatnot, millions of dollars being spent. But something as basic as when you go and identify that audience in reality, when you're trying to figure out your targeting capabilities and strategies to see how am I going to acquire, who should I acquire, you pretty much go back and say, oh, I'm going to give me everybody, let's say in Chicago from the age of 18 to 24. And you realize, wait, what just happened? We just did this whole exercise and a massive initiative to create and do all this segmentation work, looking at all that data, but the application of it just totally ignored it. So I think to say it simply is the challenge for anybody is learn how to apply small pieces and nuggets of data at the end of the day to solve a human need, to understand the human need emotionally and functionally, and then doing your best to enable it, at that very moment. Because with the pace at which the consumers are moving today, with the amount of technology they have on their fingertips to discover, and make choices, if we are not in that moment when she's looking for something and we don't fulfill it, she just moves on because she has so much choice. And that's the role of data.
Right. And so I'm thinking now that you mentioned a woman and she's about to make a purchase decision. She's on her mobile device. She's on her way to a retailer of some kind. What's state of the art look like right now in terms of the use of data to target on, say, a hyper-local basis?
There's been a lot of talk around personalization, when we talk about data and we talk about state of the art. But I think state of the art today is much beyond that, right? It is not just the fact that I know you are Drew and you live in a certain place and this is what you've done. That's stable. That has to be done. But what is more relevant now is another two steps. Step one is to understand your need and your context, right, at that moment in time, and building the ability to respond to that context using data. That's why there has to be focus on becoming an organization, becoming a brand that is always listening to the signals that we are not just receiving on my own assets, in my own backyard, but the signals I may get from a partner, signal that I may get from a competitor. How do I ingest all those signals and apply them to know that this is what you're looking for today, which could be dramatically different from yesterday? Step two is gradually, because I want to be conscious about mainstream versus what's still inside the lab, but gradually how brands now take that data and all those signals and the learnings from the past for you and other people like you to start to gradually predict the future. That's where machine learning and a lot of AI capabilities will play a role eventually. But we first have to understand how we leverage the currently available data, which is in multitudes, to deliver something which is no longer just personalized but also contextual, relevant to where you are in your journey at this moment. And that is the fine print. That is, the last 10 yards, on a 100-yard game.
So if I'm a modest marketer and I'm trying to cut through right now, I'm trying to get my messages as always at the right person at the right time. Is the secret here is now in predictive analytics, and is that something that a small brand will actually be able to take advantage of?
I'll answer it in two ways. One, a small brand, absolutely yes. More so than a bigger brand, because it's a lot easier for them. They can test and learn, right? They can experiment. But I would say if you are at a stage, it's crawl, walk, and run for everybody, right? It's an incremental journey. But if you're at a stage where you're still trying to figure out, how do I even identify my high value and high loyal audience, let's say. You don't even know that, for example. You're still trying to, and assume you know it, now you're trying to see how do I even reach out to them. You got to start there before we get to prediction, right? But once you've cracked that, once you know that you can, one, identify your most prime customer, your highest value, highest loyal customer. Two, you built an ability to now go find other people like that, so that you are not only doing acquisition, but you're controlling your acquisition with very high quality customers, because the more you control it with higher quality upfront, lower down the funnel, you have a better opportunity to retain them and maximize the lifetime value. If you've done all of that, then absolutely. You now think about, okay, you have the ability to deliver more personalized and more relevant experiences. Now, how do you start to predict the behavior, and that is dependent on how well are you able to understand the past, because we know past is the best predictor for the future. But that's where marketing is going. That's where marketing will gradually evolve and is evolving from a very flight-based, very time-based to more always-on, from very pre-planned to more algorithmic and more programmatic marketing that is continuously learning and continuously understanding what is the next best message for you, whether that is an email because you have not come back in the last 7 days, while before that you used to come every single day. So I'm going to reach back at you, right? Or leveraging social to figure out, if you're not coming back to me, where else can I find you? Perhaps social, with something which is relevant to you, to inspire you to come back one more time and then one more time and so on.
It's very cool. So we're talking about the future of marketing, and we're going to take a quick break. But when I come back, I'm going to push Mayur for some real world examples of this in action, and so that we can all walk away with a sense that we could actually do this without being a systems engineer. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com. Okay, we're back. This is Drew Neisser, as you hopefully know by now, and this is my guest is Mayur Gupta, who's the global VP in growth and marketing at Spotify. So let's talk, Mayur, about a real world example of this application of data for a marketer.
I think the one which is very top of my mind that we did, and there's a lot of great, fantastic response that we saw, and a lot of great press as well, was the holiday campaign that Spotify did. I'm sure you and many of the listeners would have read about it and would have actually experienced it themselves. But we did an out-of-home campaign in November, December during the holidays. And that was the first thing at that scale that I've been part of since joining Spotify. And I was so inspired and just fascinated by how the teams demonstrated bringing data and insights, to tell a really immersive and compelling story. And it was a fascinating example where we actually looked at listening patterns and listening habits, for our fans, specifically focusing on 2016, which is obviously has been 1 year which is full of turbulence and change. And we thought, why don't we capture those interesting and sometimes bizarre listening habits into great experiences that are not just individually relevant, but also culturally and humanistically relevant. So an example was, if you read about some of the creative that was out there, it said one of them was, "Dear person who played sorry 42 times on Valentine's Day, what did you do?" And there were many great examples, which were actual data from actual fans that became great nuggets, right? To inspire participation, to inspire curiosity, to connect with people, and so on. And some of these were so funny. And we just cracking up, as we were relooking at the numbers and so on. So I think that to keep it very simple, that was one live example that is still very much hot. I'm sure as you walk around, you will see some of those out of home, ads, pretty much around you.
It's funny. I mean, we've been talking about digital marketing, and yet, in many ways, outdoor is very old school. But the way you use the outdoor is, to me, what made it so interesting was, it was almost like you were using this outdoor to target one individual who exhibited some rather crazy behavior on the platform. But at the same time, anybody who was a member of the Spotify community would be immediately in on the joke. And I think that was the part of it that was that there were layers to the thing. If you were a Spotify user, you totally get it. If you weren't a Spotify user, you just find it funny, because who the heck would play 42 times? I'm curious and so I could sort of say, whoa, wait, why outdoor? And why not some digital platform? After all, Spotify is a digital platform.
That's an interesting point, but I'll go back to the comment you made, which I thought was very interesting, Drew. And I've been a firm believer of the fact that the digital transformation in our world today does not mean that the focus is shifting to digital. For me, it's the convergence of the traditionally isolated digital and analog worlds, right? Where as a consumer, I do not see these as two distinguished and isolated worlds anymore. And there is no better example of that than when you're actually out there shopping in a retail environment. And how many of us actually have our smartphones open where we're trying to scan something or trying to look at, additional offers online and use them, or trying to get more information online. And I think, look, as a consumer, the consumer does not see these fragments of channels in digital and analog. It's the brands and the marketers who do. And at least we are a firm believer that we don't see these as distinct experiences. And, with all the connected devices, with voice recognition, with all these things that are connecting and stitching this world, it's almost impossible to say what's digital and what's analog, right? And I was presenting the other day at Adage, and I had the example of Chris Dancy, who's the most connected human being on the planet. Would you call him a physical being or a digital being? It's almost impossible. So I think with that mindset, obviously I look at even the out of home as an extension of the digital presence. Obviously, we had a lot of extension into online channels too. So while we may have had these assets in sort of traditional billboards and many other places, there's a lot of marketing that happened online. It was a perfect blend of many different channels. But the idea was, how do you put the human and the culture at the center, and the different channels were used to support it. Obviously, underlying with the data, sitting underneath all of that, all of those experiences.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, I being the renegade that I am, I immediately went to pirate radio, which is something that we did years ago, where we put mini broadcast units on outdoor boards so that you could have almost an individualized message. I'm sure Spotify is going to want to put that on their plan for 2017. But that aside, what's one resource you'd suggest for other Renegade marketers to sort of think outside the box, to not necessarily just sort of follow the flock?
That's an interesting one. I don't know if there is one single place that you would find. I say that simply because while we as marketers are evolving, in response to a transformative world today, everybody's just transforming as well. So are publications and the agencies and partners, right? Everyone started at a certain point, but they realized that they have to come at the intersection. So from a resource standpoint, I think publications that were focused more on marketing and so on are now trying to bring the focus on data and technology and digital. Some that were more technology realized that technology itself is not enough. You have to bring data, you have to bring storytelling and understanding of the customer experience. But personally, I really enjoy Adage. I think it's evolved from being primarily focused on the advertising and marketing world to now adopting the evolution of digital and the underlying transformation to now the intersection of marketing and technology. I think they had their first conference this year. So that's at least one of my favorites. Of course, there are many other out there that talk about the intersection, and I always enjoy that because that challenges you to think innovatively about more the application of these different assets, data, technology, and marketing to change human life than just saying what's great creative, great marketing, or great data.
Got it. That all makes sense. So let's wrap up. What's the toughest lesson you've learned when it comes to marketing?
One thing that I learned a few years back from a mentor of mine was it was never about the channel. It was never about how creative and innovative your idea was or how great and cool the technology was, but it was always about the human need, the human desire. And if you don't put the human at the top of your hierarchy, you will have great campaigns, great creative, great messaging, but you may not change the human behavior, and you will eventually not be able to drive substantial growth, and eventually, which means you won't be relevant, for the customer. So again, for an engineer to realize that, for whom, the world started and ended with technology, it was a big revelation. And, for me, I often say if the first slide in your deck doesn't start with the customer need, you're missing the point.
That is a wonderful sort of circle back. And as I wrap up this episode and think about some of the things that you talked about, I want to highlight a couple for the listeners. One is that data is an opportunity for any marketer at any level. You talked very much about the need and the context and making sure that the data aligned with that and that you were listening for those opportunities. I think things can be simplified for the audience, and I just want you to focus for a moment and say you're going to use data on Facebook, and an easy way to do that is to take an email list, upload it to the cloud, let Facebook find those folks. And Mayur talked a little bit about creating a lookalike audience. Facebook, for example, makes that very easy. And the other part of it is you don't need a lot of money to test it and learn. And that was a point that Mayur made, is that small brands can test and learn and see a little bit of incremental movement. And what's so interesting is you can do that on a geo basis. You can do it on a mobile versus. So we're over here at Renegade, we're big fans of using Facebook as a way of testing the use of data and the ability of data. I thought it was interesting and important that even though we spent a large portion of this conversation on data, when Mayur wrapped up, he talked about bringing it back to human. And I think that just because you're talking about predictive analytics and behavioral marketing and using algorithms, the human is still at the end of this, the person making the purchase decision. And building a relationship means really thinking about your customer, not as a data point, but as a human. So it's a great place to wrap up. Mayur, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I really appreciate you being on Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Great. Thank you, Drew. It's a great opportunity. Thank you so much.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.